Rob, you recently got to talk with Lieutenant Colonel Roger Healey, who not only served a couple times in Vietnam, but was one of the first Green Berets, if I understand correctly. Is that right?
Yes, Sam. Yeah, Roger was a Green Beret officer after volunteering for Special Forces during the Kennedy administration, and before that, he served in Korea, and he's one of the originals when it comes to the Green Beret Officer Corps. Um, and he gives us in this interview quite a rare insight into the sort of early developments of Special Forces doctrine, and his personal account of his time in Vietnam in 1963, which was really before the war escalated and major ground troops moved in.
Man, yeah, I can't wait to listen to it. That's going to be such a unique insight into that first kind of breed of special forces troops that were setting up the foundation of the mission over there in Vietnam. Awesome. And then he also knew Lieutenant Colonel Tony Nadal, or Colonel Tony Nadal, is that right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. This was when I met him. This was October 2022, and he and Tony and Ken Bowray, who we both very good friends with, um, you and I. So they used to get together and shoot weapons together, and I had the real privilege to be able to be on site with Roger and Ken, shooting some old sort of 19th century weapons with them. And Ken had urged me to sit down and talk to Roger, and also Tony. It was his wife's birthday, I think, so he was heading out, but he spent a good hour with me on a Zoom call from my hotel room, where we talked about his time commanding a company on LZ X-ray with Hal Moore, and that's actually going to be linked at the end of this video, so people can watch that too. Some incredible Special Forces history right there, just being made available to us to record for everybody to see into their lives. And with Roger especially, this is the only time he's given an interview to anybody. And this was he was in stage 4 cancer, sadly, and passed away probably 2 months after giving this interview. So it was an amazing time to sit with him in his kitchen, and just hear his whole history as it came flooding out of his memories. He's smart as a whip, a brilliant mind, and he has excellent recall. And not only that, but he has an amazing color photograph collection of building the Plei Mei Special Forces camp. And
Oh,
we've
wow.
included those during the video and also at the end in a special memorial. And I hope this video can serve as a fitting memorial to Roger, for his friends to watch and his family, and also for those people out there interested in the history of Special Forces.
Man, what a privilege. That's so cool, Rob. Well, I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's get into it. Yeah, it's this is a roller coaster ride through Roger's mind, and his own personal history, and I really hope everyone enjoys the show.
Yeah. So, of course, he came out of this as quite a hero, as did the other fella. And he became the first chief of SOG.
It makes sense why Don Blackburn would be chief of SOG and then also Jack Singlab when
See,
he
yes,
did
I
it.
worked
Yeah.
for Singlab at Master. This was an Army test unit at West Fort Hood. And Singlab was our deputy commanding general of that. And a guy named Kavanaugh replaced Singlab. And they were both UCLA graduates. That's just coincidence. Okay.
While we're on the subject of SOG there, can you tell me, I know you've said it before, but just for camera, how you got to know Ben Baker?
Yes, I'd heard his name mentioned when I was a detachment commander, that the guy behind the tiger suit and the BATA boots and all that stuff was a civilian working for the CISO, Counterinsurgency Support Office, as part of the 2nd Logistics Command in Okinawa. And he was a civilian, but he had, he was a practical guy. I mean, he wasn't a pie in the sky guy. And So periodically, they'd put a colonel in charge of the CISO, but he was more of a figurehead. Baker was in a position of executive vice president if it was a civilian outfit. He ran the show. The colonel came. The colonel went home after 2 years. Da-da-da-da. Baker was there. He just died last year, okay, or maybe this year. And so another thing that I thought was wonderful, the first we did recon patrols to pick out our actual detachment site on the ground. But after we were established well enough with our wire and our mortar pits and machine gun bunkers and stuff, we started to send patrols out around our camp to make sure nobody was moving in on us or anything. And first patrol like that, I went out, noon came, and of course, we had sea rations or something like that. Montagnards sit down, build a fire, and start cooking rice. I said, what? And, it's like 2 hours. Jesus Christ. What can you do, So he's the guy behind getting the freeze dehydrated rations. We had a ration called the LRP, LRRP ration. And I've just borrowed that from the civilian market for mountain climbers and stuff. You combine this, work better with hot water, but it also reconstitutes even with cold water. But all of our menus were like chili con carne, spaghetti and meatballs, beef stew. And the yards wanted rice and fish heads or something like that. So Baker cooked up an indigenous freeze dehydrated ration, LRP ration for the yards. And, but my frustration, Jesus, we sat for 2 hours cooking rice. Jesus, I wanted to get on with it. And so he came up with that, and then SOG needed knives, and he let contracts through this holding company in Naha, Okinawa, and they had the 7-inch SOG, the 6-inch. I have a book on the SOG 6-inch, the Fat Guard, and these different ones, and so on and so forth. Baker was behind that stuff, okay? So second time I was over there, I had just come from being the S4, that's logistics officer for the 8th Special Forces Group. Before that, I'd been the assistant S3, but our S4 got orders to Vietnam. They made me the Group S4, and that's the logistics function, supply and maintenance primarily, okay? So when I got to Vietnam the second time, well, I don't want to digress too much, but anyway, based on that experience, they put me in charge of the LSC, Logistics Support Center, and that was the main supply base for Special Forces in Nha Trang. But we had 5 forward operating supply bases, Can Tho, Da Nang, so on and so forth, okay? So I had the 5 classes of Army supply. We had an ammo dump, POL yard, we had a rigger detachment. Now, very few personnel jumps were being made in Vietnam, but in the rainy season, some of the camps could not be resupplied by road, so we paradropped food and other supplies to them. That's what the riggers were doing. The people actually repairing the parachutes were Vietnamese female contract weenies. And we also hired a lot of Filipinos. The guys that were a doctor or a lawyer could make better money working for the U.S. Army as a tech. So we had a Filipino, they gave me a plaque when I left, and we had the Filipino villa, and we had these well-educated Filipinos in a lot of the maintenance positions, okay? Of course, we also had a U.S. warrant officer in the motor pool and armament maintenance and parachute maintenance and so forth. But anyway, supposedly the teams were supposed to draw on their regional supply base. We had what's called ISSAs, Inter-Service Support Agreement with the Navy, with the Air Force, with other Army units. we could draw from anybody. And then CISO in Okinawa was kicking in. I'm sure you know. I got pictures. If you don't, I'm sure you do though. The tiger suit was unique. Nobody else had the tiger suit. That Baker came up with that. I'm not saying he designed it personally, but he came up with that. A lot of these yards had never worn a boot before. They went barefoot in the jungle. So he came up with a BATA boot. It had a rubber sole with lugs on it and a canvas upper. Well, that was one of the few places where errors were made. They knew enough to order small sizes. What they didn't realize is that after the yards got done walking for 20 years on their bare feet, they were all wide sizes. We could have forgot a size. I don't know how you do it in Europe, but we go A, B, C, D, E on widths, okay? We could have forgot the A's and B's. They all had wider feet. So we got the lengths right, but there were too many narrow ones, okay? So here's a guy that's gone 20 years without anything on his foot. All of a sudden, he's got blisters and calluses from wearing our boot. Whereas when he was running around barefoot, everything was cool, okay? So go figure. But anyway, Baker was behind a lot of that kind of stuff, all right?
Thank you.
And I had to go to CISO a couple times on business from 5th Group, and he invited me over to his house for dinner and so on. But he made a real contribution to the U.S. Special Forces effort, even though he was a civilian, okay?
Thank you, that's great. And can we, if we just dial it back, so you joined the Army when?
1958.
And
I was an ROTC graduate. I had every intention of going to law school. But I figured, hey, I always liked guns. My grandfather was a famous antique dealer in New York, and his specialty was arms and armor. And my dad was his principal assistant. They had wheel locks, matchlocks, flintlocks, suits of armor, halberds, pikes, you name it. Okay, so I was like weapons, okay? So I was commissioned in infantry, and I figured I'd do my 2 years, get out, go back to law school. But nobody in my family had been a lawyer, okay? I didn't have a role model to follow into the law. My uncle was trained as a chemical engineer, but as I told you, became an archaeologist specializing in the Maya. My father worked for his father in the antique business, blah, blah. My great-grandfather was a very successful carriage manufacturer, but carriages went kerflooey. He had a falling out with his son. He was hoping to transition to automobiles, and he did make some automobiles for people like J.P. Morgan and William Vanderbilt. Dudes like, I have pictures of these cars and stuff. And he had made electric cars too. Move over Elon Musk. He had a thing that looked like a carriage, and the guy rode up on top in the seat just like a coach driver, but with a steering wheel, and it was a battery-operated car, and they said ideal for use in the city, blah, blah, and so on and so forth. But I didn't have a role model in the law to follow or something like that. And I got in. I always enjoyed the outdoors and hiking and canoeing and that kind of stuff. And I like guns, and so I integrated into the regular Army and stayed.
And how did you go from there to Special Forces?
Well, as I told you, when I got to Korea, we had a guy in our they reorganized the Army. They were worried about the atom bomb, okay? So they came up with something called the Pentomic Division, and it was an attempt to decentralize greater. The old system was called a triangular system. 3 rifle companies to a rifle battalion, 3 rifle battalions to a rifle regiment, blah, blah, blah. The battle group had, and the infantry battalion was commanded by a lieutenant colonel. Well, somebody came up with this bright idea calling it the battle group. And we had 5 infantry companies reporting to a full colonel in the battle group. The idea was to decentralize more and make a less concentrated, attractive attack target for nuclear weapons, okay? So I was there in the 1st Battle Group, 7th Cav. Ironically, Tony I commanded Alpha Company, 1st Battle Group, 7th Cav. Tony commanded Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Cav in the 1st Cav Division Air Mobile. Years later, almost a twin sister unit, okay? So while I was there in Korea, we had a captain named Joe Titano. And I think he was Guamanian or Samoan or something. He was like a South Sea Island kind of guy. And he'd been in Special Forces. So I asked him a couple of questions about Special Forces. He told me, what the idea was, blah, blah. So there was a place you could indicate what your preferences were for your next assignment. I said, at this time, I would welcome a Special Forces assignment, never thinking I'd get it. But at that very time, Special Forces was expanding. They put out a big dog and pony show for Kennedy down at Bragg with Yarborough, and Kennedy was on board, and Yarborough asked Kennedy's permission for us to wear the beret. Before that, they only wore the beret out in the field. In the cantonment area, had to wear the baseball cap, okay? And so Kennedy was on board with the SF concept, and they were expanding SF. So I got my request, and myself and another officer were both sent to the 7th Group. And we got to the 7th Group, and in those days, they trained the officers separately from the enlisted. I went to the Special Forces officer course, and the enlisted went to the enlisted course, but now it's the Q course, and they all go through the Q course, okay? So there were quite a few new officers in the group when I joined the 7th Group, but a lot of the NCOs were veterans of the World War II airborne divisions like the 11th Airborne, 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, as a group. And unfortunately, Colonel Briscoe, Mr. Briscoe, he was a historian, got this wrong. He said, well, how about those, he came back and asked me some questions. How about those duds you had to work with? I never called them duds, not for 1 minute, but they were older. Think about the math. If you're an 18 or 19-year-old in 1944, 20 years later, you're all going to be almost 40 years old, okay? So our NCO Corps, the experienced guys that came out of these airborne divisions were older than let's say, a weapons man would be today, or a demo man, or a medic, okay? Because they'd been through the World War II experience. They were just older folks, okay? Mm-hmm. So we got there, and there was lots of new officers, okay? Tony was a new officer. His classmate Joe Schwar was a new officer. And I came in from the 1st Cav in Korea as a new officer, and I knew they weren't going to let me do anything till I'd been through the course. Now, at the very time I was on leave, I had not had an opportunity to take leave while I was in Korea. There was no point. Where the hell would I go? I wasn't married. I wasn't going to meet my wife somewhere. Okay, so I had a lot of leave accrued. I spent some time visiting my uncle in California, my mom in New York State, and checked back in right after Thanksgiving of 63, okay? And, I'm sorry, right after Thanksgiving of 62, all right? And like I say, I noticed a lot of the officers were new, but a lot of the NCOs were guys with former airborne experience in the World War II airborne divisions, okay? And that's what we encountered. And so at the time, the White Star missions had come and they were coming to an end, okay? They were in Laos. So they decided, hey, we'll do the same thing in Vietnam, okay? And the idea was a new term, Special Forces was supposed to take care of unconventional warfare, like the French Maquis during World War II, behind the lines. But they also said, well, if you can do it, you can also counter it. So they came up with the idea of counterinsurgency, okay? So you were supposed to be a doer and a catcher of doers at the same time, okay? So, as I say, White Star was phasing out. And as I told you, there were 3 groups that were contributing to the effort in Vietnam. Shortly before I left Vietnam, the commander of the 4th Battle Group, 4th KF Battle Group, Colonel George Morton, was alerted to go to Vietnam and establish a Special Forces Operational Base, SFOB. He and his immediate group and headquarters were a permanent party. They were there for 1 year. In the 4 core tactical areas, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is crazy because it should have gone A, B, C, D, but instead they flip-flopped A and C, okay? But up north in Da Nang, you had a B detachment. In 2 Corps in Plei Ku, you had a B detachment. In Bin Moi, you had a B detachment. And in Can Tho down in the Delta, you had a B detachment. 3 of those Bs came out of the 1st Special Forces Group in Oki. 1 came out of the 5th Group at Fort Bragg. 5th Group wasn't in Vietnam yet. And then the 3 groups, because they hadn't formed the 3rd or the 5th or any of that yet. The 7th sent 8 teams. The 5th in Fort Bragg, not in Vietnam yet, sent 8 teams. And the rest of the 8 teams came out of the 1st group in Oki, okay? We were there for 6 months on a TDY mission, very similar to how they handled it in Laos, okay? So I checked in, went through the Special Forces officer course. I think Tony and I were classmates in that course. And right after I got out of the course, they alerted 8 of us to take command of 8 detachments. And it wasn't ODA in those days, it was the A team, okay? So 8 captains were designated to head up these teams, and they filled the teams with a Lieutenant XO and 10 NCO position fillers as Team Sergeant, Intel Sergeant, Weapons Man, Demo Man, Commo Man, Medic, okay, very highly qualified. And so we started mission training, and we knew who we were going to replace, okay? We were supposed to go to a camp called Mong Bok. If this is 2 Corps, and this is Plei Ku over here, Mong Bok was up near the 3 Corps line, okay? And one of the problems was they had a fixed-wing airstrip, but it ran counter to the prevailing winds, so it was a bitch to resupply that place. And Mong Bok was commanded by a 82nd Airborne Division captain, older fellow named Jim Callipy, and his XO was the famous George Marichek, okay? And at any rate, they decided they were going to phase that camp out. So I no longer was going to replace somebody on site, which had been the original plan. The other teams, I think, all did indeed replace an existing 7th Special Forces. See, they set the 7th to replace 7th teams, the 5th to replace 5th teams, the 1st to replace 1st teams. They didn't scramble that, okay? So we were no longer going to go to Mong Bok and replace Callipy and Marichek.
Can I ask?
We were going to go out there in a fairly secure area, with the help of the district chief, we were going to recruit a new strike force. In our case, it was Montagnard Jarai tribesmen. Train those guys, put them through like a U.S. basic rating regimen. And then after we trained them, which was really not nearly enough time if it's a U.S. recruit, you'd go through basic training, advanced individual training, unit training, this, so forth. So, at any rate, once we had them trained, we were supposed to go down to the southwest of where we were in a secure area, but not too far from the Cambodian border and pretty close to where LZ X-ray occurred, and set up a new camp there at a place called Plei Mei. All right. So,
Before we get on to building the camp, Roger, can I ask some sort of questions about?
Sure.
Yeah. So the first is you were with Tony stateside, and you getting orders. Did you volunteer for Vietnam, or were you just given orders for Vietnam?
I must have been more gung-ho than some people because I did not come on active duty as a regular Army officer. I came as a reserve officer. They had a requirement in those days. If you were regular Army, you had to volunteer for either airborne or Ranger. I volunteered for both, okay? Didn't have to volunteer for any of them. And when I heard about Special Forces from Joe Titano, when I was in the 1st Cav Division, I said, that's for me, Special Forces, Special Forces. So, and like most of my contemporaries that filled in those 8 slots at C Company of the 7th, we wanted to go to Vietnam, okay? There was a kind of feather in your cap to be picked as one of these guys to lead a team in Vietnam, you know? We're professionals, I mean, so you don't want to sit on the bench if there's something going on, right? So yeah, I was happy to be going to Vietnam. Yeah. I volunteered for Special Forces, and I was delighted. I was one of the 8 guys picked to take a team to Vietnam. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is 1963, and
yes, by now it's 63.
And you're all
April 1st, about April Fool's Day of 63, they formed the teams. Okay. And we were going to go through about a 3-month training program. We essentially were going to train each other. Like my team had landmine warfare and demolitions, blowing stuff up. And so each team was in charge of training this, that, and the other teams would attend the training, and we'd go through the training together. It also gave a good opportunity to evaluate the guys that were going to be on your team, okay? Later on, it became individual replacements. You're a commo man, I'm a commo man. Your tour is up, I come in and I replace you, but the other 11 members of the team stayed the same till the next guy's turn was to go home. And this concept, whole new team came in, and after a week overlap, the old team went home. There were pros and cons. The pro was you got to really know the guys that were going to be on your team that were going to be going together. The con was you were all a bunch of newbies in a hostile environment, okay? Before, there was only 1 or 2 newbies at any given time in the team. In this case, you know, all 12 guys were new. Yeah, we've been communicating by letter and photograph and stuff. But, you know, we were all rookies for the first couple of months we were there, you know.
So when you were given orders to go to set up the camp at Plei Mei, can I just ask a little bit about, so this would have been 63 still?
Yes.
And
we went over in August.
Right.
And as soon as I got there, I knew I wasn't going to Mong Bok, all right? I knew I was going to go to a new location. I was sent to a relatively secure area. To my immediate left, almost to the Cambodian border, was the Duco Special Forces camp on Highway 19, commanded by a good friend of mine, who later, by the way, made 3-star general, Johnny Corns. commanded Duco, and I was about 15 miles east of him in a fairly secure area, and we were putting our strike force through basically U.S. basic training, how to shoot a rifle, this kind of stuff. And they sent us 20, they weren't the greatest, they sent us 20 guys from Mong Bok that had been in the strike force of Mong Bok, so we'd have a sprinkling of seasoning within our strike force, okay? And we had a Vietnamese Special Forces team co-located with us at Plei Mei, where we were located initially.
What was the sort of washout rate for regional force guys you were recruiting in?
Hell, sometimes they desert. I guess if a guy was totally incompetent, we might, I don't know for sure what we'd do, but we were glad to get these guys. Now you got to keep in mind, many of these people had never seen a firearm before. They hunted with crossbows and spears, okay? They never wore boots before. They lived in these long houses up on stilts. They raised water buffalo, and they had sort of a subsistence economy raising field rice, not paddy rice, field rice, okay? Very, very primitive people, okay? But they were most, by and large, loyal little guys. And one problem was the training. Part of our 3-month training period, we spent an hour or two every day either studying Vietnamese or French, okay? And we had a few Vietnamese instructors there at Fort Bragg to teach the Vietnamese. And in the case of the French, I remember we had a French-Canadian guy that was going with us, and he was our French teacher, okay? And that was probably, in our particular environment, only the educated people spoke French. So chance of getting a Montagnard that spoke French weren't that great, okay? So when we would instruct, we had Mr. Ha was my best interpreter, and I had Charlie and a couple other interpreters. I'd say it in English, and I did speak some French, and I was pretty good with Spanish. I'd tell Mr. Ha something, or one of my sergeants would tell Mr. Ha something in English. Mr. Ha would in turn to the Montagnard interpreter and say it in Vietnamese to the Montagnard interpreter, and then the Montagnard interpreter would say it in Jirai to the recruit. Okay, so we're going through 2 levels of interpretation. Ain't so bad like what we were doing today. Small arms, single shot, boom, boom. Talking about mortars where you're leveling bubbles and fire direction center. Woo! For example, we were issued all World War II U.S. Army weapons. We had Grand rifles, M3 grease guns. The best, and should have been all, as far as I'm concerned, was the M1 carbine. They were lightweight, and the troops could carry them easy, and the ammo wasn't overly heavy. The grease gun wasn't real heavy, but it was all stamped parts except for the bolt and the barrel. But it shot 45 ammo. That's heavy as hell, okay? And we actually had some of these guys that were average weight of a mature Montagnard male, maybe 125 pounds. Here we got the dude carrying a Browning automatic rifle weighing 20 pounds and 6 magazines in a belt. That joker fell in the stream. He was going straight to the bottom. We were never going to see him again, okay? So the best way would have been something like the eventual M16 or the M1 carbine. We shouldn't have messed with Grands. We issued Grands. We shouldn't have issued that heavy stuff to these guys. They couldn't hack it. And with the grease gun fired from an open bolt. So it was dangerous to have a Montagnard. He's got a live magazine in the gun. He's got the bolt back. Or the other thing was the Model 97 Winchester slide action shotgun. once you had a round chambered, there was a little button you had to push in order to break the breech open and extract the shell. So I always told my guys, if I only hear one shot, I'm not going to worry about it too much, because some yard shot off his M3 or the Model 97 Winchester. So some of these weapons were pretty good, some of them not so good. But you can imagine the challenge, even for relatively simple stuff, of a guy that's never, totally unfamiliar with the terminology to start with, has never seen a gun before, and you're starting from square zero as the, sight alignment, sight picture, trigger squeeze. If you got a automatic weapon, don't hold the trigger down. You fire the whole magazine up, fire in a burst of 2 or 3 shots. I mean, this is a challenge to try to teach these guys this stuff. Okay?
How about using grenades? Did they have like the Mark II pineapple?
We had grenades. Didn't issue too many of them to the yards. And they couldn't throw too well either. Throwing games were not part of their culture. So, but we had grenades. I saw crazy stuff. I got a picture. If I looked hard enough, I'd probably lay my hands on it. We had the first patrol, practice patrol, and I'm inspecting the troops. And the pistol belt was a heavy canvas belt with a bunch of grommets on it. And you can hang canteens, ammo pouches, first aid, with little hooks to it.
Yeah, I know.
Act.
Yeah.
Now this has got a slot. Some of my knife gloves got these little hooks that went through the grommets. Okay, and you wore suspenders and ranger harness. You got the pistol belt, you got the harness to help you keep the weight of this stuff up. You might have ammo pouches, first aid pack, canteen, all this kind of shit. I look down at this guy. He's got a grenade tucked into his pistol belt, and he's got the suspender snap through the ring on the grenade. Not exactly the best solution, okay? And it's a great picture of me of this combination of anger and horror on my face looking at this guy. He's got the suspender hooked to the ring on the grenade. Boom! Oh, man. It was a challenge, I mean. And then the damn B detachment, they wanted us down there we don't have U.S. Army basic trainings, 8 weeks. Then comes AIT. Then comes unit training. After 5 or 6 weeks, they wanted us to go down to recon and move into the new site. And yeah, I'm going to obey the order. But, even if these have been American recruits with no language difficulty, this still would have been a big challenge. These guys weren't ready to get into firefights. And a lot of times the guys with a grease gun, if we took fire, they'd jump in a ditch and fire up the whole magazine. Like that, we're trying to teach them a 3-round burst. It was a challenge to show these guys this stuff. You're talking about extremely primitive people, and you're trying to introduce completely new technology to these kind of guys, okay?
So did you feel reasonably safe going out on patrol with them, or did you worry that one of them might ND be?
No, I wasn't worried about them so much. Later on, after the first incident, I got quite concerned about that we were not up against Superman. I mean, there might have been 15 or 20 VC guys wearing black pajamas, probably armed with old French weapons like the MAS 36 or the MAT 49, but they did have access to some of our bounding anti-personnel mines. And the first firefight we got into, we were dispatched down out of our training base to reconnoiter the site for our new camp at Plei Mei, which I only later found out had been the site of a French fort. I didn't know that. there was little or no evidence that it had been, but later on reading, I found, hey, the French had a fort there. And about 5 kilometers to the north was a Montagnard village called Plei Ku. And the VC came in there one day, and anybody cooperating with us, they killed the head man and this kind of stuff. So we got down as far as Plei Ku, and it took so long to get loaded and out. We had to go out, I think it was 19, pick up 14, go down 14, turn off on this dirt road, go in about 15 clicks on this dirt road. Tried to get off on an early start, but by the time we got down there was no way I could reach the site of the camp. We parked the cars at Plei Ku, the trucks, and deployed in as a patrol to go down there, and I could just look at my watch and we ain't gonna make it, boys. So we stopped and we pulled back to Plei Ku, cooked our evening meal, and then the next morning we got an early start. So we're moving down. The road continued past Plei Ku down towards Plei Mei, but the bad dudes must have known we were coming, because do you know what an abattis is?
No.
That's where they cut a tree down and let it fall across the road. You don't completely cut it off to make it even worse. I mean, if you cut it free, at least you could drive. You cut it just enough so it falls across. Boom, 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 boom. So we were moving at a snail's pace because they had abattied the road. Every few meters, there was a friggin' tree, one going this way, one going that way, one going this way, one going that way. Finally, we hit a halt that was so lengthy, I figured something was wrong up front. I had one of my engineer sergeants up front. So I left where I was in the column, and I went to find out what the hell's going on. Well, it was just the trees were bigger, and it was taking longer to get around them and continue on. And while I'm up at the front, kaboom! Da-da-da-da-da-da! Da-da-da-da-da-da! Oh, shit. So I turn around, and I start back down the column, and I come around the corner, and fairly close, I'm not going to try to make it sound scarier, but fairly close to where I had been, a guy now, Montagnard Strike Force member named Siuglia, I'll never forget his name, Siuglai, Siuglia. He either stepped on a US M16 mine, or he hit a tripwire, or they detonated it from a command position. Just a second. This fellow has the M605 combination fuse coming out of the top, okay? It has 3 prongs on it. You step on it, not good. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't step on it, there's a little pin going out the side, and you can fasten that little pin to a tripwire, and the guy trips it, he pulls that little pin out, goes boom. Or a dude could stand there or lie there in ambush and pull the pin out when you walk by. What happens when you walk by, the propelling charge throws this cast iron cylinder up about neck high, and the main charge detonates. The pound of count B blows the cast iron cylinder into smithereens, and I'm guaranteeing you're not just going to be dead, you're going to be dog meat. Okay, so I come around the corner, and there's Siuglia. Top of his head's missing. He's got his lower jaw still in place. One arm is gone, and he's dog meat. Another guy to the right is dead, and 2 more guys are wounded, badly wounded. So, got to get the wounded guys out of there, right? So, we had to switch from my internal radio net to the air to ground, say, hey, we got 2 guys wounded. And we had to pull partway back because of these abattis. A helicopter couldn't just land anywhere. If the road had been clear, the helicopter could have landed on the road, so we had to pull back a ways, get the 2 get the 2 wounded guys out and the 2 corpses out. And the bad guys, after the mine detonated, they only fired a few rounds and then they pulled back into the jungle. So, not good, not good. And the troops were completely demoralized and all that. And by the time we got these guys evacuated, the wounded guys, it was too late to complete the recon. And so we pulled back, and on the way out, we got ambushed from a hill overlooking the road. Now we're on the road we can drive with the trucks. And my comm supervisor, Sergeant Scott, got wounded in the upper leg, had to call in another medical evac, get Scott evacuated. And they fired a few shots, and I was able to grab a couple of yards and push them up the hill and, try to counter these guys. They just faded back into the woods. So we had to do it all over again. And this time I got a really early start. We didn't screw around. We drove right down to the end of where we'd stopped before. We unasked the trucks, took off, and we had ponchos with poncho liners, which is that camouflage blanket that you tie inside. And we were, screw it, we weren't coming back. We were going to go down. We were going to get to the campsite, all right? So sure enough, we ran out of daylight, just lay down in the jungle, and earwigs are working under the poncho. And next morning we get up, we move on down to where I didn't know there was a French fort there. It wasn't until much later I learned that. And there was a stream going into the river, and there was a little uphill portion, and there was like a hut up there, and that was the only semblance. And we were taken under fire from the hut, and they had an automatic fire weapon. I think it was a French Chatterall. That was a French BAR, had a magazine on top. That's what I think it was. And it wasn't an AK-47 or anything like that. So they shot at us, we shot at them. They pulled back, and we kept on going. And the B detachment was very upset, still pissing me off to this day. I reported that we'd been taken under fire by a machine gun. Well, that was a no-no. I should have said we were taken under fire by an automatic weapon, because in the hierarchy of intelligence reporting, a machine gun implied that it was a company-sized unit that was shooting at our ass, and that some bunch of weenies had an automatic weapon, okay? Big whoop, Here we are under automatic weapons fire. We keep going. We counter the fire. They pull back. I don't need my ass chewed because I use the word machine gun instead of automatic weapon. If you wanted me to say automatic weapon, you should have told me that a long time ago and established the terminology that was to be used. I did not know that a machine gun meant that there was an enemy company-sized force, okay? Still pissed off over that one. But anyway, we completed our recon, went back, got everything ready, lock, stock, and barrel. I borrowed a lowboy, to carry bulldozers and heavy-duty stuff. We piled all our crew-served weapon ammo, like the border rounds and all that, on the lowboy. And lock, stock, and barrel, we headed on down. By this time, they had assigned a Navy CB team to us, and the CBs had a D4, which is a relatively small bulldozer, and they also had a road grader. So we were able to knock those trees out of the way with the bulldozer and the road grader and keep on keeping on. And I had to get the lowboy back pretty quick. I borrowed that to put my ammo in, and sure enough, we set up, and we had a couple of GP medium tents, and we pitched those. And the first priority, of course, was to get the perimeter established and get the ammo in a safe position, because it was laying out there in crates out in front of God and everybody. So it was a long time before we started building buildings. We had to clear the area. We had these terrible chainsaws. They were called strunks, and I called them skunks. Instead of like a McCullough or some good brand, and they were always breaking down, stopping. So we had to clear the area and start digging trenches and weapons positions and all that, get a place to store the ammo, get a camo bunker set up. Initially, we slept in a GP medium, and like I said, initially, the mortar rounds, they were in wooden crates and stuff. All we could do was pile it up. I didn't have any place to put it yet. And so a lot of these pictures are going to show the construction of the camp. For various reasons, we picked the triangle as being a pretty good design because you could get interlocking fire from the two corners, machine gun fire and grazing fire. And so we decided we'd go with an inner perimeter of triple concertina. I'm sure you know what concertina is. And then hand grenade throwing distance out. We had a double apron barbed wire fence. And between the inner fence and the outer fence, we had 2 rows of claymore mines set up. And my junior demolitionist had 3 years at Duke in electrical engineering, and he made us control boards, and they were to be manned by an American Special Forces guy, and they were right in the middle of each leg of the triangle in a little bunker. And what the guy could do with this is the bad dudes, they had toggle switches for each firing circuit, and then a major knife switch that activated the juice to the whole thing. So if this is our triangle here, and the bad dudes are coming here, well, we could push the toggle switches for these 4 claymore mines, 1, 2, 3, 4, then throw the big knife switch and fire like a broadside from an old wooden frigate. And I had 2 rows of these claymores so we could do it twice. Or if it was a human wave attack across the whole side, we could mash all the toggle switches, throw the knife switch, and fire a super broadside out. Now, you had to watch these claymores because the sappers could sneak in the wire and flip them around the wrong way. So we dug little holes and we stuck the legs of the claymores down into cement so they couldn't flip it. And Paz, his name was Nick Pazuros, he had a little test circuit on each one so we could hit that and see if we had a live circuit. There are pictures of that in these pictures here. And but that was a priority, was getting a priority. The perimeter set up. On each corner we had a machine gun bunker sandbagged in. We built a camo bunker down in the ground with just, like a breathing window reinforced, and then put PSP, that's that pure steel planking. You can make airstrips out of it. Pile sandbags up on top of that. They took the CV bulldozer, dug a hole in the ground, and then using one of the few new 2.5-ton trucks I had with a winch, we carried big logs and set the logs on top of the trench, okay? And then we piled dirt on top of that, smoothed it off, had a stair entrance, and that was our ammo bunker. And it was pretty much secure from, I don't think these guys didn't have mortars yet, but just thinking ahead, we didn't want the ammo in a precarious mode. Water was a problem. We were up on top of this hill. The river is down here, maybe 300, 400 meters away. We had what they call a water buffalo trailer pulled by a 2.5-ton truck. They'd fill that up with water, chlorinate it, we eventually, on the team house, but it was a long time before we built the team house, we had a shower system built with 6 55-gallon drums interconnected, and that was our shower. And, we built a mess hall for the Montagnards to eat. The supply building was built by conventional U.S. standards, concrete slab, wooden walls. So my 2 weapons men slept in there, and wooden lapboard siding on this tin roof. The team house had bamboo matting sides, tin roof, but we did make a little about chest high stockade of 2 rows of relatively narrow branches going around and filled out with dirt. So if it was a direct fire weapon, they couldn't just shoot through the walls. If they did shoot through the walls, it'd be over the height of our bunks. Okay. And then we built rather primitive houses for the strikers. We used wood from a sawmill to make the team house and the mess hall and the supply building and the commo bunker. But for the troop billets, we used just tree trunks and again, bamboo matting, siding, and thatch roofs for them, tin roofs for us. As I say, an equilateral triangle, 180 degrees on a side, 2 81-millimeter mortar pits, 3 machine gun bunkers, and so on. Another problem, of course, we had like 300, 400 Montagnard strikers there, and periodically we had to feed them. We didn't have, crop fields or anything like that, so we have to go into Plei Ku. And we try to stagger the day of the week. I mean, we didn't always go on Wednesday, but they knew goddamn well that after so many days, we had to go out, get bags of rice, fresh green vegetables, live chickens, live pigs, bring this in to feed the yards. And it was all hands on deck for that. We left a few, security forces back at the camp, but most of the team, we needed them to drive the trucks. I mean, old Captain Healey's driving one of the trucks, okay, and drive in, get the rations, come back down. Initially, the jungle was impinged right on the 1-lane road. This was still in the dry season, okay? So it was red laterite soil, so every time you drove over it, you made the ruts in the road. They weren't wet, they were dry, but you'd go dig down deeper and deeper and deeper in the dust. When you finished, we wore goggles. When you finished the mission in and back to Plei Ku to get the food, your uniform was red, your face was red from this red laterite dust. And of course, in the rainy season, it had turned slicker than hell. And what you try to do in the dry season is straddle the ruts. But in the rainy season, you couldn't straddle them. You would slip down. And, all-wheel drive, low range, didn't matter. You're going to slip down into the rut, and your wheels would be trapped in there. When you drove, you had to drive with your thumbs outside the spokes of the steering wheel, because when the steering wheel hit that, it might kick back. Suddenly it could break or dislocate your thumb. So you soon learned to drive like this. It didn't have power steering in those days, okay? And they did continue periodically to use mines on that road. And when they did, in the dry season, you couldn't do anything without leaving footprints and so forth. So they'd take a tree branch and sweep up all the footprints. And of course, they'd sweep out a much bigger area than the mine was actually confined in. We did not have a mine detector, So that meant getting down on your, my got one right here. The hell is it? Here's the approved solution. You take your knife like this and you go. And you probe into the dirt with your bayonet, okay, till you hit the metal mine, okay? And then you would gingerly expose at least the top of it, and better, the top and part of the side, put a 1/4 pound block of TNT in there with a time fuse and blow it in place. It was really folly to try to pull the mine out. I guess you could take paracord. Yeah, here's that clip I was talking about that goes on the belt. Anyway, to take paracord and tie it around the fuse and try to yank the mine out. Best to blow the mine in place, okay? So very seldom would you achieve sympathetic detonation. Typically, the TNT would blow the mine into pieces, rendering it useless, but you wouldn't get a double boom. The military explosive is pretty insensitive, and it's a damn good thing that it is, okay?
I think we've got a good idea of the camp layout from that. Where would the helicopters land?
Oh, we cleared an area. Yeah, it was outside the wire, but it was close, and it was still a cleared area. Here's where the wire might have ended, and there was a clearing there. Helicopter assets were too precious to use for resupply. So if a big shot was visiting us and our mail would come out on the chopper, and if somebody was wounded, the chopper would come out to evacuate them or so on. But we couldn't get routine supply. There weren't enough air assets to fly in bags of rice and vegetables. That's what forced us to use the trucks to go into town and buy this stuff, okay?
And did the camp get attacked while you were there?
Not while I was there. In, I think, October of '65, about a year and a half after I left, there was a major attack on Plei Mei, and Charlie Beckwith, the guy that organized Delta Force, he was in charge of Project Delta as part of 5th Special Forces Group. He led a relief column in to help out. I think a guy named Captain Moore was in command of the camp when that happened, okay? We did try to run ambush patrols around the camp at night. Like one night we'd go and set up, 10, 15 guys, couple of US along a known trail, see if anybody was coming in, just lay their doggo overnight. That's where I was the night Kennedy got assassinated. And just a couple of weeks before, Zeman New had been assassinated, the president of Vietnam, and his brother-in-law had been assassinated. And I came in with the patrol to the wire, and Sergeant Williams, my demolition sergeant, came up, Captain, they shot the president. But shit, I think he's talking about the new Vietnamese president. It didn't dawn on me. He's talking about Kennedy, for Christ's sake. And we had a radio called the ANGRR5. I've got a freaky memory. I can remember all kinds of little minutiae that mean shit, but this is nothing more. You may not have it in the UK, but Zenith made a shortwave radio called a Zenith Transoceanic, and it had a regular broadcast wave and a bunch of short waves, so you could listen to boats and shit like, well, we have one of those radios, the ANGR, so we're trying to get the word on what the hell had happened. We were some of the last Americans in the world to know that A. Kennedy had been assassinated, and then let alone a day later, Jack Ruby had shot Lee Harvey Oswald. We were some of the last people to learn that information. But anyway, in February, the new team came in, led by a black captain named Paul Kane, and they replaced us. We had 2 or 3 days with them, and then we flew home to Goldsboro, where Seymour Johnson airstrip is. Landed on a cold night in February. My girlfriend's subsequently wife met me there, and it was in the middle of the night. And they gave us the next day off, and then they dissolved the teams. They debriefed us, gave us a physical, dissolved the teams, but they kept 5 of the 8 A detachment commanders in C Company of the 7th, which was the mission training company. So it was our job to train our replacement's replacement. Our replacement was already on site, and these were the guys that were going to replace our replacements. And one of the guys we trained was none other than Roger Donlon, and he was going to Tony Nadal's old digs Nam Dong, and of course that was attacked in force, and he was the first Medal of Honor recipient of the Vietnam War. I was in a B detachment, and we had 4 A's under our B. We were B9, I think, or B7. And then the other 4, Tony's group was, they were the A's under there, but actually it was the A's that taught the other A's the various subjects that we were learning during mission training. Okay?
Did you go back to Vietnam and do another tour after that?
Well, yeah, but not from there. I finished the Armor Career course, went through Pathfinder, went to the language school, which I really didn't need to go to, but I kept my mouth shut because my grandmother lived in Carmel, my uncle lived in Big Sur, and the Army language school was in Monterey, California. So finally I was going to be near my relatives. They stupidly sent me for Spanish. I already had a good in Spanish. I didn't need, but I just kept my mouth shut. So first day I go into the chief of Iberian languages and I ask him in Spanish, when do the classes start for the wives? He said, where'd you come from? I said, I don't know, they sent me here to study Spanish. So they gave me the final exam and I passed it. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, shit, I don't want to go down to Panama yet. I said, the way it worked, if it was a Western language, they started a new cycle every 2 months. So 2 months, 4 months, 6 months graduate. I said, why don't you put me in the next Spanish class to graduate that's only got 2 months to go, and I can brush up my conversational Spanish, listening and talking. I could read Spanish quite well. It's okay, they did that. So I joined the next class to graduate. When the 2 months was up, they said, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, well, what are the options? He said, well, we could give you an instructor to talk to you a couple hours a day. And I said, no, I want to try Portuguese. I said, there's 85% vocabulary overlap. So they put me in Portuguese. I jumped ahead to 2 months. So I graduated from Portuguese as well. And that changed my entire military career. Because when I went back to Vietnam, I figured I'd come out on the Command and General Staff College list. And what had happened that particular year, the Brazilians sent officers to our Engineer Advanced Course, Armor Advanced Course, Infantry Advanced Course, Signal Advanced Course, and 2 officers to the Command and General Staff College. Well, the particular year I was in Vietnam, the second time, no American went to the Brazilian Army Command and General Staff College. Their big poobah general came up and said, you didn't send an American down to go through our class. So by then, Westmoreland's chief of staff, he says, send an American down to that class. So Healey speaks Portuguese, that's the guy. So I'm expecting orders to Fort Leavenworth, and it says, Escola de Comando e Estado Maior do Exército Brasileiro, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. What? So, but as luck would have it, they didn't have to do that because we have a program called FAST, Foreign Area Specialist. And every officer is supposed to have a secondary specialty, okay? Well, a FAST student, he goes to the language school. He goes to a civilian university and learns about the history of the country he's going to specialize in. And then for the rest of his career, he's going to get alternate assignments linked to that country, and then he's free to do something else in between. You might become the assistant attaché. Eventually, you'll become the attaché when you're a colonel. You might be assigned to DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, on that country or whatever. As luck would have it, the year I went, they sent another American who was a FAST student. So he was my classmate. But that one year, there was no American, and they were looking for a body to send. If I didn't have Portuguese on my record, I would not have been that guy, let's face it. And then subsequently, I got that sent back to Brazil a second time because there was a guy besides my classmate, Steve Krupa. There was a quartermaster officer named Craig Bate, and their CNGS was 3 years long. Well, we don't have 3 years to waste. We sent the guy for 1 year. They put Bate in the second year, and it was his turn to go back to Brazil. He had a family crisis. I had just graduated from graduate school. My secondary specialty was logistics. So I went to University of Texas, took my MBA. That was a prerequisite for a logistics officer. And Bate had some kind of family crisis. He couldn't go. They pulled my ass out again, sent me back down to Brazil. The problem was, by then my mother-in-law was our dependent. She had a heart condition. Brasilia, the new capital, is at 5,000 feet or so, and they didn't think that would be a good place for her to be. So I hit the second tour. But what I'm saying, if I didn't have that Portuguese on my record, and don't get me wrong, when I came back the second time, I could speak Portuguese almost as well as I could speak English. I still retain a lot of it. And, but none of that would have happened if I just kept my mouth shut and chilled, basically twiddling my thumbs for 4 months. But by forcing the issue and taking Portuguese, I became qualified in that area. It's unfortunate our Army doesn't put more stock in that. A lot of Army consider that's a real asset to have a guy that speaks 2 languages besides English pretty fluently, okay? Doesn't mean that much in the American Army. But I had a good time doing it, but the second time I couldn't take my family because my mother-in-law was our dependent. And by then, my wife and I had 2 little kids. So leaving them alone for a couple of years, I came home on leave for 2 30-day leaves, but neither my wife nor I was very happy about that. If it hadn't been the 2 little kids, she'd have gone with me and I'd have pulled the second tour down there. But that's what happened with regard to the language.
So when did you finish with it? Did you retire as a
Yes, as a lieutenant colonel in had 20 and a little bit, 21 years for pay. And I was in the Pentagon. I was in Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, and I was managing the truck and the armored personnel carrier fleet for distribution. We had a guy, there was 3 big Army staff agencies. DESRATA, Deputy Chief of Staff for Research, Development, and Acquisition. They decide what new gizmo you're going to buy to become the new tank or the new cannon. You got DESOPS, Deputy Chiefs of Staff for Operations. They decide how you're going to use this gizmo. And then the Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics handles the distribution of it. So I spent the last 3 years of my career in the Pentagon doing that, and I could see I was not going to be a general. So I bailed out with 20 or 21 years service.
Looking back on Vietnam, do you have any sort of thoughts about it? Was it worth it?
Well, I think all of us realized that it was a winnable war. There was an ambassador backed up by Averell Harriman, a very rich and powerful man who was a big shot in the State Department. Besides, his family owned New York Central Railroad, among other things. There was an ambassador in, I think, Cambodia named Sullivan, okay, he was an American. And he negotiated a neutrality treaty with the Cambodians. So we stayed the hell out of Cambodia. Meanwhile, the NVA's marching right through Cambodia and Laos, and coming across the border wherever they chose into North Vietnam. And had we blockaded Haiphong Harbor and really gone up there and interdicted the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we could have won that war, there's no doubt. And I think a lot of low-ranking people realized that. I think the big boys were scared of involving the Chinese or the Russians or something like that. But we didn't have to give them free access to come down through Cambodia and Laos and send in, untold reinforcements and logistics and stuff like that. That was very frustrating.
In the end, do you think that the war in Vietnam and the parallel civil wars in Laos and Cambodia and what happened in Indonesia as well, do you think that did effectively stop the spread of communism?
Well, I think it did help to a certain extent. There was, some people say the domino theory was totally bogus. I think it was only partially bogus. After all, Pol Pot took over Cambodia, lock, stock, and barrel. But yeah, I think they saw there was some pushback. But we certainly could have won the Vietnam War. I just said, how? Blockade Haiphong, interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We could have won the war.
Yeah, last week I was talking to Colonel Paris Davis, and he was fighting the communists in northern Thailand about the same time. So he was on his third tour. He was actually stationed in Thailand.
Ken spent a tour in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm. So this thing was, spiraling across all these other countries, and
yeah, well, they gave it a real good shot in Latin America, country I went to. They started off working on the educational system, all right? And they had a president, very left-leaning, named Goulart. His nickname was Django, and he was a big-time lefty, okay? And they were trying to make inroads into Brazil, and that's when the military intervened, and Castelo Branco became the first military president of Brazil, and then for several straight presidencies, the president of Brazil was a 4-star Army general, okay? Now they've gone back to civilians, but they were trying in Brazil. We all know what they did in Dom Rep. They were trying in Africa. It was a serious ball game that we were playing there, So it was, I really think that, we lost 58,000 people killed there. Some of them were friends of mine. And, we could have won that war. And it was very frustrating to look at the grand strategy of what was, what was going on. And then, of course, the last couple of years were just look at it and shake your head,
Well, Colonel, thank you so much for spending time going through some of your history today, and it's I have to commend you on your memory and your record of details and names and places and events.
Yeah, I can see.
Special.
I know what all these pictures are. I could give you a caption for virtually every picture on here, but a lot of it. See, here's the ammo bunker. Here we've excavated the we made the excavation with the CB's bulldozer, and now we're going to come in with the truck with a big log and run a big log over the top of the ammo bunker. These are all tree trunks. Then we're going to pour dirt on top of that and smooth it out. And here's the entrance to the ammo bunker and so forth. But here's the team house. I've got, construction of every building from day one to completion. And I just grabbed that Leica M3 and then walk around the area every day, snap a few pictures of this one, that one, and the other one. I gave all the team members a copy of these pictures, too. And
I'll get my hands on a set and have a look through them, and maybe we can connect up again. And
this is where we trained the Montagnards. This was our rifle range. This was in the secure area before we went to Plei Mei, okay? I'm shooting a Thompson submachine gun. My XO's shooting a M1 or M2 carbine. Here's my XO setting up the payroll. See, the fiction was the Vietnamese were paying the strike force, but we quickly found out you just couldn't turn them loose with the money. They'd steal the goddamn money. Mm-hmm. So most of the yards were completely illiterate, so we'd get a thumbprint, and then my intel sergeant would act like we could actually read the guy's thumbprint. But we made up a little pay voucher, and my XO stapled the piastres to the pay voucher, handed it to the Vietnamese Special Forces officer to give to the yard. But we didn't, couldn't possibly turn that payroll money loose to the Vietnamese. Be the last you'd see of it. First time, we issued them 2 uniforms when we first recruited them. Well, after about 2.5, 3 months, they were looking really ratty. So the Vietnamese Special Forces commander says, the troops are looking bad, we need fresh uniforms. I said, yeah, so we gave this guy the uniforms. Took them in the goddamn Plei Ku and sold them. So from then on, you need a uniform, you come up to supply building, you strip. I give you new pants, new shirt, that's it. It was, there was a lot of graft going on. And one of the problems with the CIDG program is the Montagnards did not like the Vietnamese and vice versa, okay? So in many cases, the loyalty that existed between the Montagnard and the American A-Team rather than the Vietnamese Special Forces team, Mm-hmm. And also in the mess hall, we found out that there were some ethnic Vietnamese in our strike force, but it was mostly Montagnard. We found out the cooks who were Vietnamese were feeding the prime cuts to the Vietnamese ethnics rather than to the yards. I mean, you got to treat people even-handedly. So, we quickly learned not to trust the Vietnamese. You couldn't be too obvious about it, but hell, there was no way we were going to turn the whole payroll over to the Vietnamese Special Forces. It's all gone into their pockets, and that'd have been it, So, what can I say?